Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today, I'm doing something very unusual. Actually, let me give a minute here. There are lots of people coming in. All right, give me just a second. All right, so I'm going to get started. Okay, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is a very unusual meetup. This is actually, I started trying to read a book. So first day I'll tell you the story of how I came up with doing this meetup, and then we will do the meetup. So I started reading this book, and I really couldn't figure. See, I'm very big on reading the original, so I started trying to read this book in original, and I couldn't figure out what was being said. It was just too obscure. It was too difficult to understand. So I did what I normally don't do. I started reading the prologue of the translator. Now, the translator is Walter Kaufman, who is a remarkable thinker. So he was able to actually identify some things, which I found points which were extremely interesting. This book is called I and Thou by Martin Buber, and I have not read it. I have just read parts of the prologue that the translator Walter Kaufman has written. Walter Kaufman is a remarkable person. I've read his translations of Nietzsche. He's a very good thinker. And the points that I'm talking about I think they come directly from Walter Kaufman. They may be parts of the book. I don't know, and I don't recommend the book. But the reason I'm doing this meetup is that this book or this prologue raises an important question. And a question is much more important than the answers. So the question is this idea of I and you. How do we actually interface with another human being? And what is going on? What are the various ways in which people do this? And how do you think about those things? Okay. So that's what this meetup is going to be about. So what I'm going to do is that really the heart of what I want to get at is that, okay, how do you authentically relate to another human being? But what we are going to do in this meetup is going to set up the stage, look at all the various ways in which people seem to interact with one another, try to list all of them. I never got to his part about this book's take on I and thou. What is the relationship? Okay, and I don't know whether it is good or anything like that, but this is something that we have worked a lot on in our meetups. And we have a meetup coming up on Carl Rogers' ideas of authentic relating about 2 weeks from today. And so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just give you an introduction of that when we come to this I-you relationship, okay? So I'm going to set up, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, I was planning to summarize it, summarize my own thoughts, but then I went back and read what Walter Kaufman had written, and I thought it was remarkable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out parts of it. It's very short, but he puts these points forth uh, really beautifully. So I'm going to read that out. Now, this is a small group relative to our meetups. So I want it to be to be interactive. So here is the plan. I'm going to read out firstly all the descriptions that Walter Kaufman has. They are just a couple of paragraphs each of various relationships that he sees. Keep track of all the points that you have, all the thoughts that you have. about each of these relationships, because you will find you will recognize them in yourself as well as other people, how they relate to you, how they relate to other people. So keep notes of all of them, keep questions of all of them. As soon as I'm done with reading of Walter Kaufman on this, I'm going to talk about what I have learned from Carl Jung and Carl Rogers on this topic. And then I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion. So I want it to be, this is almost like a breakout room. So I want everybody to be able to put their thoughts on the table about this. So you can ask, we'll start with some questions and then we will go ahead, questions for clarification, and then we will go ahead and have anybody who wants to talk uh, put forth their own observations on how people relate to one another. Okay, so with that, let me get started. So firstly, that's the plan. Do you guys have any, if anybody has any questions about the plan, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in Zoom. So this is not about this book. This is about how people relate to each other. How do you have dialogue with another human beings, and what are the various ways in which people do that? All right. So I'm reading out now from Walter Kaufman. So he starts with this. There are men who, let me just a second here. Sorry about this. Okay. All right. I'm going to start here. Men's attitudes are manifold. Some live in a strange world bounded by a path from which countless ways lead inside. If there were a road sign, all of them might bear the same inscription, I. Those who dwell inside have no consuming interest. They are not devoted to possessions, even if they prize some. Not devoted to people, even if they like some. Not to any project, even if they might have some. Things are something that they speak of. Persons have great advantage that one cannot only talk of them, but also to, or rather at them. But the Lord of every sentence is no man but I. Projects can be entertained without complete devotion, spoken of, and put on like a suit or dress before a mirror. When you speak to men of this type, they quite often do not hear you, and they never hear you as another I. You are not an object for men like this, not a thing to be used or experienced, nor an object of interest or fascination. The point is not at all that you are found interesting or fascinating instead of being seen as a fellow I. The point is not at all that you are found interesting or fascinating instead of being seen as a fellow I. The shock is rather that you are not found interesting or fascinating at all. You are not recognized as an object any more than a subject. You are accepted, if at all, as one to be spoken at and spoken of. But when you are spoken of, the Lord of every story will always be I. Okay, so this is, I like his prose very much. I think this is a good way of capturing. So this is the first one. So I would recommend that you use a pen and a paper and keep track of all of this. So one is the I relationship, and people who appear to talk to another person, who kind of engage in at some level with another person, but they do not really see the I in them. They do not see them as an end in themselves, even a little bit. They are only means. So the entire focus is on the I. And everything, whether other objects, other people, are just means to doing of being focused on the I. So this is one kind of operation. Let's go to the second one. Okay, this is two-part one. One, this is he's just going to describe I, it, and it. Okay, so I'm going to read through this. Men's attitudes are manifold. Some men take a keen interest in certain objects and in other men, and actually think more about them than they think of themselves. They do not so much say I or think I as they do I. They take an interest. They do not give of themselves. They may manipulate or merely study. And unlike the men of the I type, they may be good scholars, but they lack devotion. This I it tendency is so familiar that little needs to be said about it, except that it is a tendency that rarely consumes a man's whole life. Those who see a large part of humanity, their enemies, of course, as men of this type, have succumbed to demonology. Demonology. This is merely one of the varieties of man's experience, and much more widespread in all ages as a tendency, and much rarer as a pure type in our own time than the other, uh, than it may seem like a fancy. So one point I want to make is that though he talks about these as being types of people, I think it is better to start by thinking of this as ways of interacting. So a person who may be primarily operating in a certain way also operates in other ways at other times. And so with that, you can kind of start abstracting it out. And then you can say, okay, this person predominantly is operating that way. So this I it tendency is a very good way of saying, okay, this is a way where you're focused on objects around you, and that's your primary interest. Um, let's take this to the next level, more extreme level. There are men who hardly have an eye at all, nor are all of them of one kind. Some inhabit worlds in which objects loom large. They are not merely interested in something or subject, but the object of their interest dominates their lives. They are apt to be great scholars of extraordinary erudition, with no time for themselves, with no time to have a self. They study without experiencing. They have no time for experience, which would smack of subjectivity, if not frivolity, in their opinion. They are objective and immensely serious. They have no time for humor. They study without the thought of use. What they study is an end in itself for them. They are devoted to the subject, and notion of using it, and the notion of using it is blasphemy and sacrilege that is not likely to occur to them. For all that, their subject is no subject in its own right. Like a person, it has no subjectivity. It does not speak to them. It is a subject one has chosen to study, one of these subjects that one legitimately may choose. And there may be others working on the same subject, possibly on a slightly different aspect of it. And one respects them insofar as they too have no selves and are objective. Here we have the community of solid scholars, so solid that there is no room at the center for any core. Theirs is the world of it. So this is people who are dominated by kind of the physical world with no separate I, no kind of separation between I, no kind of asserting of I, no asserting of individual experience only focus on the external world. There are other ways of having no I. There are men who never speak a sentence of which I is Lord, but nobody could call them objective. At the center of their world is we, or us. The content of this we can vary greatly, but this is an orientation in which I does not exist, and you and it and he and she are only shadows. One type of this sort could be called we, or us. Theirs is a sheltered, childish world in which no individuality has yet emerged. Okay, so this is the other one where you're focused on others or us in a way where there is no individuality within yourself, and you do not recognize the individuality in others as well. Another perennial attitude is summed up in the words us, them. Here the world is divided in two: the children of light and the children of darkness, the sheep and the goats, the elect and the damned. Every social problem can be analyzed without much study. All one has to look for are sheep and goats. There is room for anger and contempt and boundless hope, for the sheep are bound to triumph. Should a goat have the presumption to address a sheep, the sheep often does not hear it, and they never hear it as another I, for goat is one of them, not one of us. Righteousness, intelligence, integrity, humanity, and victory are prerogatives of us, while wickedness, stupidity, hypocrisy, brutality, and ultimate defeat belongs to them. Those who have managed to cut through the terrible complexities of life and offer such a scheme as this have been hailed as prophets in all ages. In these, now he's summarizing these five. In these five attitudes, there is no you. I, it, we, and us, them. There are many ways of living in the world without you. There are also many worlds with two poles, I, you. So this is kind of talking about everything other than I, you. Now, what I want to do is I want to open it up for any questions and comments before we get to the IU. So in order to, we have the standard rules, type exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom you can ask a question or you can make a comment. Let's actually have a discussion about this before we go to the next one, because I want to see where everybody is, so we can tailor the discussion accordingly. So that's the first rule, type exclamation mark. Second rule, keep on topic. Third rule, be brief. And fourth rule, speak your mind. Disagree with anybody you want, but do so courteously. All right, so who would like to go first? So firstly, I want to know whether this is incredibly confusing. Is this making a point or anything? So we'll start with Marjorie, Donna, Joe, and Brian. Marjorie, go ahead.
As I said, I tried to read the book and got nowhere, but I'm still confused. So that's, I think I'm confused because as you describe things, I try to think of people I know and examples of it. You can do with that what you want, but that's...
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Donna.
I find this really interesting. I'm wondering, I'm a very visual person, so I'm wondering, just because it's almost like a comparison, I see this grid of how I can kind of mark things off, like here's the I, here's the I, it, here's the I, you, here's the I, us, you know, like a, not so much a diagram, a grid, you know what I mean, with
Mhm.
the horizontal and vertical, then I'd be able to kind of see, oh, okay, these are, that's just my kind of thing that would help. I tried to write notes down, but
No, you should draw. I mean, Donna, I mean, I also operate like that. For example, on the Meetup page, I have a diagram. That's the diagram that I have been using. This, you know, I definitely encourage you to just draw the diagram. It's very simple. So you can just put, you know, I in the middle, and then you can connect it to all these various things. And then you can see what, you know, so I would definitely recommend that. And visual, it's a very powerful way because what the visual representation does is that it puts all the things simultaneously in front of you. So you can see the relationships between them, and you can say this, not that. You can put like us and them on the opposite side. So you can use the visual field, and our visual cortex is very large to be able to see connections. So you can definitely, I encourage you to do that. Did
I
you have
did,
anything more?
yeah, I did see that if you're talking about the diagram on the meetup, I did see that, but I'm thinking more of a spreadsheet that help, you know, like what are the items that we're thinking about? What's the parameters that go across the board? And then you can almost mark like, okay, this I has no interest in possessions or in, you know what I mean? Kind of
Oh,
like,
I like that. Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like a grid. That's just what I was kind of thinking in my mind. Oh, this would be kind of cool if there's a grid, and then I could look down the line and go, oh, this they do this I does I think for me anyway, it would help to.
Okay, so let's do that. I like the idea. So one way of doing that, let me see here. Okay, I'm just drawing with my the mouse pad, so it's not going to be particularly pretty, but here goes. So you can have a line like this. Give me a second. I need to move some windows around. Just a second. Okay, so you can just do like this, right? This is what you're talking about, and you can put in columns like this, right?
Yes,
Like that, yeah.
exactly. Yep,
And you can look at
exactly.
yeah, exactly. So that's a good idea. So please, yeah, you can do that. I mean, that's why I like using pen and paper. And this is the kind of things that I will be drawing on the side, and I encourage you to do that. Excellent. Next up is Joe, Brian, and Mike.
Um, so I actually, I like this. I'm just wrapping my head around it. But, the one that struck me was something with the us, them kind of struck me because that turns into, and you were mentioning the darkness and the light and and it's like, this is the basis of othering.
Yes.
And so that if you can kind of map these out,
Mhm.
as the Excel sheet was just Donna just brought up with the Excel sheet, you can kind of start to see the deeper part of human psychology that goes into how we behave. So it becomes a lot more clear. So I was a few minutes late, so I apologize for that. So I was just trying to wrap my head around it. But even the I relationship, as seeing people as a means to an end,
Mhm.
that's something as well. That's kind of, it starts to express a deeper understanding of human psychology, and I'm starting to see out of this the words we use.
Mhm.
So anyway, that was my only comment. Is the us them is essentially, is that the equivalent of othering?
Yes,
Other,
no,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So each of these can be kind of expanded dramatically. And my take on this is quite different from Walter Kaufman's. I see that all of these are actually needed to some extent, not exactly as he puts it, because he's done selectively. Like, for example, there is a I-us relationship of saying that, that I recognize myself, but I recognize that there is a common purpose that we have, that, this group of people have. and to be kind of speaking to that common purpose. So there is kind of a valid I, yes, I, us relationship where each person kind of acknowledges their own individuality, but also like a common purpose. And so I think each of these points, the thing I like about this kind of framework, this to me is that this raises more questions of saying, okay, what are the various ways in which people can interact? And this us them is all about othering. And that's like a shortcut. It's like a lazy shortcut of saying that, okay, just I don't need to think about them. They're just barbarians,
That's right.
And yeah, go ahead.
And so I was wondering, is like the scale that exists, I wonder if there's an optimum, way for dialogue if you're talking about dialogue, like, because, you don't want to totally suppress the self, right?
Yes.
Because this total, it has to exist on a grid, so to speak. But then what's the ideal?
Yes.
Is there an ideal? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, but so that's the exact, but kind of raising the question, right? That am I, are we, give me a second, I have to admit people. So you can evaluate what you're doing, or what somebody else is doing and say, okay, to what extent are they paying enough attention to their own self or not? Are they actually open to another human being? Are they actually hearing what this other person is saying? Are they open to them in an authentic way or not? Are they really focused on a common purpose that a group of people that they're working with is trying to serve, or they're disconnected from it? So they have no conception of, I connecting with us, or are they so immersed in that they do not see any other distinctions? So they kind of, and that happens quite a bit, within companies, within countries, within families, where the us becomes so dominating that individual, whether yourself or somebody else, gets the short shrift. But being able to talk about these things and try to kind of calibrate yourself and try to see where the other people are is a crucial thing, because that's, we are social beings and we have to, and we are individual beings, and it's both. So you kind of have to see exactly what is going on. And this is a good, I thought that this kind of presentation by Walter Kaufman was a good starting point to start looking at all these issues in a holistic way. I do think that there is another thing, which is like a nihilistic approach, none, where a person is actually not connecting with anything at all. So they are saying no, basically, to everything around them, all people, all world, and themselves. So there is that as well. Thanks, Joe. Great points. Next up is Brian, Mike, and David. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, just a few short comments. First of all, I don't know the book or the author, so I have no background here. I saw the Meetup last night and was intrigued by the diagram, though did not get time to study it. As you were talking through it, I found it a sort of an interesting comment on personality types, and couldn't stop myself identifying some that I thought I knew, in particular the I and the I-it. But at the moment, I would say, though I'm very intrigued, my confusion level is at maximum.
Okay, that's good. I mean, intrigued and confusion level as being maximum is a good state for, it's when you have identified a question, so you see that there is something worth looking at there, and you still have not figured out what it is and what is it, even its shape. And that's a good position to be in. So if I've added questions, I take pride in adding questions. I do not, for me also, this is something that I just read. And for me, the reason I'm focusing on it is that it seems to actually bring up many things that we should be thinking about. I should be thinking about that I'm not aware of, and I have not thought about it. And this is just opening up the questions. And then, this is a process. And I'm committed to, I found that learning with other people is the most effective way of learning. So each of you are saying something, like, for example, Donna says, put it in a spreadsheet. That's a brilliant idea. So each of you are kind of raising points, which is going to accelerate my process of trying to answer this question. So thank you, Brian. Next up is Mike, Dave, and Chachi. Cheryl. Mike, go ahead.
I endorse the grid concept that you mentioned. And by what reason of that is it's both situationally dependent and what your objective is and what that objective dependence. For example, you behave differently in a friendship, you'd behave differently in a family situation, you behave differently in a meetup. And let's say you're at the motor vehicles trying to get a car registered. That's a different kind of I-thou relationship. So that grid really becomes a three-dimensional matrix of your relationship with the I-thous, and there could be different kinds of thous.
Mike, so explain to me the three-dimensional. I hear what you're saying. I think it's a great idea. So one dimension is these I, us, them, etc. What is the second
like
dimension? What's the third one?
What is your objective in the discussion?
Okay.
So if you're at a technical conference and you're giving a paper and you're fielding questions after the paper is given, you have one kind of relationship, and it also is dependent on who's asked that question.
So what you're saying is one of the axes is your purpose, right?
Right.
What is the third axis? So first axis is this
is your role is a purpose,
mm-hmm.
And who you're talking to is a purpose, is an axis.
Okay.
So it is a spreadsheet or a matrix,
mm-hmm.
or shall we say a vector that goes off in all directions. If you're trying to if you're at a meetup trying to present an idea like this, I have a different role with respect to the group, with respect to you, and
got it.
And also, if I am giving a takeaway, it's still a different, yet another role.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Mike. Mike, you have anything else? So that's it.
I can explain in further detail, but
no. You put all the details needed to kind of make your point. You're saying that it depends on the context. Absolutely.
Right. It depends on the context. Yes. And you could have, one person could have a different role in each different situation.
Absolutely. So, so one way to do the spreadsheet is on one horizontal axis, you can put. You guys, I recommend you that you use pen and paper. I could draw this, but I don't want to keep, kind of sharing the screen. So one dimension is this kind of I, you, I, it, etc. I, us, I, them on one side, on one of the axis. On other side, you can put individual people. I think you will have a better idea of what is going on. And the third one, you can put kind of different purposes, how different people, behave under different circumstances. Next up is Dave.
Thanks, Shrikant. Interesting topic today, and started me thinking, of course. And I was just realizing that many times people let the object speak for them. I'm thinking of a man or woman driving down the highway in the fancy sports car. They're usually convertible, that screams, "I've got it made." Or up here in the Northwest, we have the yachts, the $1 million yacht, and he or she is up there in the flying bridge, cruising down the harbor, waving at the friends, and in the stern is a fancy name that's very thoughtful. I don't want to talk to you. I'm in a whole nother world. I don't speak to you, but I've got it made, and see, this is the proof of it.
Okay, interesting. Next up is Cheryl.
Yeah, Shrikant, this is interesting. I never really thought about this before. But from what your descriptions of, I'm getting two of them kind of confused.
Mhm.
The I, and I think it's the we, because I'm wondering the distinction between an I that can't see an other because they only see themselves as another I, there, and the we that doesn't see the individual because they think we're all we's. Or am I getting that incorrect?
No, let me explain. I think the best way to see it is in the context of a family. There are family folks, like a mother or something like that, for whom they think only in terms of the family, we as a group, without kind of having kind of an identity of themselves or other people. They kind of, we is basically when a person is not assertive enough to put forth their individuality, and they differ completely in attention, in values, in time, in emotions to the group, so that there is no, and it's the group that matters. Even so, they are not only being kind of unjust to themselves, but they're being unjust to other individuals in the group too, because they don't have that. Like, for example, like a person may not really give the individuality to a sister. This is most common amongst families, where, because that's kind of our primate heritage, us as a group. Individual kind of full-fledged kind of development of individual is a much later stage. It requires kind of the prefrontal cortex, it requires thinking, all kinds of things. So it's like, it's that is the basic kind of stage. So that's what he's talking about with the VV. It's a very primitive stage, mostly found in families, but it is also found in businesses. For example, a person might get so excited about the kind of the business itself, that they don't really put their own are aware of their own interests, their own thoughts, or that of other people. This happens when a country gets into complete craziness, where they become VV and just focus on that. It always, many times in that situation, it is also combined with the we, them, us versus them. And the us operates in a way where there are no kind of individuality left within the us. And that is typically when the us, them also develops. So that is the nature of the kind of the VV. The nature of I is very different, completely different. It's a much later phenomenon. So this wouldn't exist in the evolutionary context. This is when a person is so much caught up in their own thought, their own thinking, that everything else, they are not really able, everything else is just a means to that. They are not actually able to see other people. They really do not care deeply about a person, about a project, about things. It's just focus is on, it's like a primacy of consciousness. It's primacy of consciousness without respect for existence, physical existence, existence of other human beings, or life itself. It's almost kind of here and now. How am I feeling? Something like that. It's just caught up within their own self. So that's the distinction. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, next up is Joe.
Sorry to ask this, but the idea is that does this fit into the four-factor model? As far as how you know, you were talking
Mhm.
about it, and I thought about it when you talked about the family aspect of it. You know, that fits into, you know,
Sure.
then your systems.
Yeah, I have a much more simplified version now, Joe, from 4 to 2, and I will apply to that after we finish doing this IU. So
Oh,
I'll
okay.
come to that.
All right. All right.
I'll
Sorry
come to
about
that.
that.
No, no,
All right.
no. That's excellent question, but I'll come to that. All right. So now that everybody we have had chance, I've had chance to hear what other people have to say. Let me go to the IU. Okay. Now here I don't know what the book says. Okay. And I don't know whether it is good or partly good or bad, or I have no idea how good it is. My suspicion is that it will have some profound points from everything else that I've read so far. Because if somebody can actually set up the problem this way, a person needs to have the ability. It's very, very likely that they will have something to say about it. But I don't know what that is, so I'm not going to talk about that. But what I am going to talk about is that same concept as seen by Carl Rogers. And we're going to do a full meetup on Carl Rogers' ideas as a part of the Jordan Peterson group. We're going to do Carl Jung, I think, in the next 2 weeks. And the week after that, we're going to do Carl Rogers. And the idea there is authentic relating. So what I'm providing now is an introduction, a short introduction to the idea. And hopefully that will get you interested in attending the meetups, reading up on this concept of authentic relating by Carl Rogers, and take it from there. Okay. So the way I like to present this is as follows. Both Carl Rogers and Carl Jung had a very high opinion of what human beings can be. They thought that we are magnificent creatures. Yet they noticed that most people do not really live up to that. They are quite miserable relatively, and certainly not magnificent creatures. In fact, as in their actual life. So they asked the question, why? Why not? What stops people from their core is good? What stops people? And both of them, in their own terminology, had said that there were two problems. The first problem is that each of us has all kinds of wrong ideas about ourselves, other people, and the world, which are self-sabotaging. So every time we try to do it, even start along the right path, these ideas, we cut ourselves. This is like a layer within ourselves, which is like a self-sabotaging layer, which stop us before we begin. On the top of that, I think most people have fear of other people, and so most people wear these shields, these very thick shields, in order to protect themselves from other people or to appear as something to other people. Carl Jung calls it persona. So looking at it as a whole, so there are these magnificent creatures running around with this entire layer of self-sabotaging things, wearing these massive shields, bumping against one another. Okay, that's not very pretty. Okay, so they see that that's what is going on, and that's why kind of the core of what we can be never gets actualized. So what do we do? Now, each of them had their own elaborate answer to this question. For example, Jung's answer, we did 13 meetups on that. It is basically the idea of individuation, of making the unconscious conscious, of facing your fears and going past them. through the darkness to the light. So that's Jung's answer in short. But Carl Rogers, he has a very brilliant answer, very simple and brilliant answer. He says, it's just very deceptively simple, okay? He says that if you authentically relate to another human being, actually try to see who they are, what they are saying, try to understand them, try to have in an empathic way, it has a profound impact on both the parties, not only you, but also them. What it does is that it partially dissolves the shields that you have up so that your life can flow through. And secondly, it partially undercuts these self-sabotaging mechanisms, both for you and for them. So why would that happen? Because their self-sabotaging ideas are going to be different from yours. And if you actually see them, then you realize that the ideas that are holding you back, some of those ideas are not holding them back. And you can see kind of the artificiality of the ideas, your wrong ideas, if you actually connect with another human being at an authentic level. So that is a solution of authentic relating. And it seems very, very simple, but I think it's very powerful. So that's what that concept is. And so in terms of the best thought that I've seen on this I-U, I think Carl Rogers has the best idea that I know of. And that's something that we're going to look at in great amount of detail about 2-3 weeks now in the Jordan Peterson series on Thursdays. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about I-U. Now, again, I'm going to open it up for comments, questions, anything. So you can go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to comment. So you can comment on any part. You can comment on the I-U part that I spoke about right now. If you have any questions, you can talk about it. If you have your own take on it, also you can go back to anything that was said before. All right, who would like to go first? Joe, go ahead.
Just going back to what you said before, the I-U has no individual experience at all. Is that correct?
No.
Oh,
Because
okay.
I-U is his conception, like this Martin Buber's conception of the right, of what should be, what is one of the critical things. It's all about, so it is saying that there is I, so you're acknowledging I, and you're acknowledging you. So the bad part of it, kind of a destructive part of it would be you, where you are just focused on the other person up to a point where you're not even focused on what you are. So you get completely overwhelmed. Your focus was entirely on the other person. But I-U is equivalent to Carl Rogers' idea of two individuals authentically relating to one another.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. That clears it up.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks. Next up is Janet. Janet, go ahead. Janet, you need to unmute yourself.
So I am a special education diagnostician, so that's where I come at this from. And one of my first thoughts when you started talking was, if we see this as ways of interacting, how much choice does the individual have to move from one to other, from situation to situation? I mean, I saw in the I and the I-it, both of them to me had focuses or had aspects of autism. In that autistic people tend to see others as a means to the end, particularly if they're a high functioning autistic person. And a lower functioning autistic person would be more like the I-it. where they're only focused on objects. And, and so those individuals can't really change who they are. Same as somebody comment about the I is also very narcissistic too. And so it's cognitive issues, but it's also mental health issues. That how much choice do people have to move from situation to situation?
Oh, absolutely. In some cases, there would not be choice, but there are a lot of cases where I think people, can be aware of these things. It's not necessary, the things that people end up in some of these things through various reasons. And I think there is a lot of, many people have choices. And I agree that some people don't have choices.
And so the extremism of each category would be the people who don't have choices, and most of us do have and can go.
Not necessarily. Like there are people who are in, like, say, the us them category, fairly extreme. I don't think that all the extreme cases, so I don't think it has to do with extremism. I think it does have to do with what you're saying of kind of the kind of the physical limits. There are physical limits for sure. Does that make sense? I mean, yeah. So it varies. I mean, so you kind of have to look at it from on a case by case basis and say, okay, what exactly is going on here? These are kind of ways of just measuring, what is going on, and then you still have to ask the question, why is this going on? What is the reason for it? Is this because of something going on in the brain which is different? Is this something because that they got into it because of their family context, their cultural context? Was it because of some kind of an experience where they kind of said, okay, it's just not worth it, and never kind of question that decision ever again? All kinds of, maybe they're just afraid of something. I don't know. And there could be multiple reasons for that. But very good. Thank you, Janet. Next up is David, followed by Donna. David, you need to unmute yourself. Dave, you need to unmute yourself.
Pardon me, Shrikant. Thanks, Lach. Yeah, instead of shield, I use the term mask. That we all wear a mask, and because you go down the street and you say, "How are you doing?" and everybody says, "I'm okay," and we're not okay, because really the only person we really know is ourselves. And I know I'm all screwed up. But when you become a relationship with another person, even a group like this, and you learn trust and that the group will be non-judgmental, then you realize maybe I can take off the mask. Maybe I can reveal my true self. That's why I learned in my divorce recovery group. It's so powerful to become a whole person. You have to admit your flaws and tell the truth. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, that's a great, great point. And I think, we are social beings. So I think kind of finding other people with whom you can be, this the point of Carl Rogers is that this helps both people. So it's like if a group is committed to being authentic, that's going to help taking care of actually a lot of things, which otherwise, which you may not be able to, each person may not be able to do just by themselves. Next up is Donna, followed by Tanya.
So I really love if you authentically relate, you try to see who they are. And
Donna, can you speak into the mic more? We can barely hear you.
Yeah. So I love the Carl Rogers quote that you said about being authentic. I think if in relating to whoever you're speaking with or having a relation with, if you're authentic, then I'm thinking that those other I type relationships almost disappear. And I'll give you one example of the, let me see, I'm just looking it up, the us, them, which reminded me of in groups and out groups, is that there isn't authentic seeing. It's that, you know, the in group gets so caught up in their group that they can't see, or they apply stereotypes to the out group. So that becomes inauthentic. But if we follow Carl Rogers and just truly be authentic in every interaction, then I think, like I said, all those other types of shields or masks disappear, and all those other, you know, the diagram is just I and you, I think.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks. Great observations. Tanya.
Hi, Shrikant. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So this is really interesting. And I wanted to add, I think when looking at this concept, we have to consider looking at nature and nurture. And perhaps this could be added like a subsection, or, you know, to like help understand your theory.
Sure. Let's talk about that. I mean, I think what we're trying, this is a way of kind of saying, okay, what are we actually doing? And when we start to say, okay, why are we doing this? You know, what is the kind of causation behind this? And that's where you have to look at, you know, nature, nurture, and the decisions and choices that you made, all three of them. And you kind of have to go and drill down to kind of figure out what is going on. Absolutely. So it's kind of it's a way of kind of getting to the root causes. This is kind of a framework of saying what is going on, and then these other factors of saying, okay, why is this going on? What is the history of this? Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody else? Any comments? Okay. So what we'll do is that I want to have kind of, I think a lot will happen in the smaller discussion groups. So I'm going to run the breakout rooms for only about 20 minutes. And I'm going to do, oh, wait a minute. Jeff, you have something. Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, Shrikant. So I think that you're reminding us of that we are social and solitary beings is sort of unfortunately something that makes this a little bit more complicated, but I think it also explains a lot. So what it points out is that there are always, in a sense, two relationships going on. There are two conversations going on. There's the relationship that we have with ourselves and the conversation that we're having silently, internally, you know, with us. And there's the conversation and the interaction that we're having with others. And I think I've shared with you, you know, my wife is a psychotherapist, and she says, you know, it's just never ending that that we all have at various times in our lives what you might consider to be formative experiences. And we kind of take those things in and then we project them wherever we go. They influence what we say to ourselves, and they influence what we perceive is going on in any relationship. And that's how we react, and it's how we interact. And then on the other side, there is a culture of groups. There are various beliefs, norms, ways of interacting, even the identity of the group itself. And that determines how we're sort of rewarded or penalized for how we act with each other. You know, that the dominant you know, understanding or belief is reinforced by those rewards or penalties. And so these two conversations are always going on. The conversation we're having with ourselves, which is largely as a result of other experiences that are, lodged in our amygdalas, and we're using them to, to talk to ourselves, and the conversations and interactions we're having with each other that are largely a function of the culture, of the situation, the context, the relationship we're in. And I would just offer to you that one really great tool for marriage counseling is to have the two people tell each other what they're saying to themselves. What is the conversation they're having with themselves, not just with each other?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that influences how this all plays out. That I think the dominant ways that we interact with others is explainable by the conversation we're having privately with ourselves based upon previous experiences. And I think it's also a function of, as Mike was wonderfully pointing out there and others, the culture of the situation, the beliefs, the norms, the rewards, the punishments, all of that. I'm sorry for taking so long to say that, but I think it puts it in a perspective that can be useful.
Excellent points, Jeff. Thank you very much. So I want to reiterate that, unlike Walter Kaufman, I do think that this I dialogue is a crucial part of the healthy dialogue. You have to talk to yourself. You have to look at yourself. You have to react to yourself. You have to evaluate where you are. And that's a crucial part. I mean, just like I, you is important, I, us is important. I think also I, them is also important, of saying, what is it, what people are bringing things down, who are going downward, and distinguishing them from people who are going up is crucial. So all of these are important, and all of them have their own place. So Marjorie, you need to unmute yourself though.
I have a quick question for Jeff. Is he there?
No question. You can just raise a question, and if we can.
Jeff said something about in a marriage situation, ask the other person, what are your conversations with yourself? But what he didn't, it's like he didn't finish that sentence. I found that important. That's why I'm bothering to ask. Is he saying, ask your partner what questions they're talking to themselves?
No, what he was saying, let me finish.
About them, about the other person. Is that the ending that's missing there? In other words, is it just what the person says in their head, or is it what they say about their partner that he wants to know?
What he's saying is that that each person has a dialogue going on with themselves. And if you tell your partner what is going on, what you're speaking to yourself, that's
about the other person,
not about what is going on, what's the dialogue going on in you. If both people know what the dialogue is going on in their own head about themselves, then that provides for a good human relationship.
It would be very interesting if the other were true.
Next, anyway. The thing is that, I don't want to go too far away from the main topic. So let me see. Jean, you had something.
Yeah, I just sort of trying to wrap my head around this as well, so I may be off base, but I'm just trying to think of the distinction between I versus them and us versus them, because those are two different dynamics, at least from my understanding, right? I versus them would be like, I mean, they both seem to be like usually not particularly good, right? Like I versus them would be like, I feel isolated, right? So, right, I'm the only one, and I'm versus them, whereas us versus them is like, our team versus their team, right? And it's less an isolation and more like a tribalist sort of thing. And I'm just trying to, sort of articulate to see if my thinking about this is accurate or if I'm...
Sure. This is a distinction that I'm making.
Yeah.
See, the us versus them is very well known. This is kind of, thinking of everything in terms of groups and in groups and out groups. And that's a very primitive kind of approach that's kind of a part of our evolutionary heritage. So that's the point that he's making about us versus them. Okay, but what I was realizing is that there are more relationships than what he has put forth. So, for example, he also talks about us, where individual identities are completely lost in the V's. Then he calls it we. I'm just going to call it us for now because that's how I think about it.
Yeah.
So, in the us as individual identities get lost. I do think that there is something like I, us, in the sense that you have an identity and you're committed to doing something together with a group. Like, for example, here, there is a certain kind of values that we are taking for granted. And that is the us. That is kind of, I am holding my own identity. Each of us, each of you are holding your own identity. And you're saying that we are also holding this. So it's kind of acknowledging both those things. So there is something like I, us, which he doesn't talk about. I don't fault him for that. He's just that that's just a part of his prologue to this book. And I don't know if the book talks about it and whether this is his full presentation of his thoughts on it either. But I do think that there is something like I, us. Similarly, I think the us, to me, when I talk about I, us means kind of a joint endeavor that you're doing with a group of people, with other people, whether it could be the entire world, or it could be a small group of people, or it could be just two people. But it's a joint endeavor, joint values, joint principles on which you are operating. I also think that there are others who can be attacking that. So, for example, if there is somebody who was to do a Zoom bomb right now, trying to disrupt this, right? So that would be the values that they are pursuing are different than the values that the us here are trying to do. And so I would say that is them versus I, and I will act accordingly, which is very different. So it is not in terms, so them is basically those who are disrupting some joint thing that I am trying to do.
Yeah. Sorry, if I could just
let me just add one thing to clarify. Jordan Peterson, we are both familiar with Jordan Peterson. So it's a question of, are people going up are the yes, us people. People who are going down are the them people. So it's not a fixed group of people, but it is what they're doing and what is the impact of what they're doing in terms of their impact on you and the things that you care about.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I guess maybe it's just a semantical distinction, but like I see, like let's say somebody comes in Zoom bombs, to me, that person, from that person's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're an I, and we're all of them, right? So if that troll, like a troll is an I, and he sees, so it's a bit, to me it seems a bit different than an us and them, where a troll is sort of like he just wants to disrupt, but he sees himself or herself as
right.
Yeah,
absolutely. So there are, see, this is very beautiful because you're pointing out the entire complexities. There are people for whom everybody else is them. So it is like their entire worldview is I versus the whole world. Everything else is against me. Okay, something like that. So a person like this may be in that category, or they may be part of like a kind of a group of people who do Zoom bombing together. Okay.
yeah.
So that would be kind of us versus them.
Well, perhaps you could be part, like it's almost like there's like a multiple dimensions to it, right? Like a troll is, in some sense, he's just an I and them, right? They're very isolated. But in another sense, like if you think of like certain groups where like at the same time he has these other people out there, or she has these other people where there's some sort of social bonds, you could say, in that case, that the dynamic between that, when they're thinking in that context, is an us and them. So it's almost like you're at the same time part of different groupings and interposing them based on the context.
Absolutely. So that's why I think, what Donna and Mike are saying as using kind of spreadsheet of seeing the different purposes. At the same time, they might have a family, and the way they interact with them is very different than what they do. So that's very good. Thank you very much. So I'm going to do the breakout rooms for only about 20 minutes. And because this would be a really interesting topic to talk about amongst ourselves. And then we can come back and do kind of quick takeaways and we'll wrap it up. Okay, starting the breakout rooms now.